Hi, everybody, and welcome back to The Global Gaze, where we talk art, film, and books from an international perspective. I'm your host, SarahJilani. I'm an academic and an arts journalist. So in my scholarship, I work mostly on literature and film with a particular interest in the legacies of colonialism. So you can imagine I was intrigued when I came across Bridgerton a few years ago. Now, just a disclaimer, this won't be a Bridgerton bashing video. I loved it. I binged it. Who doesn't like the wonderful costumes, the opulence, and a little bit of smut? Now, of course, Bridgerton is the genre of historical fiction. And that means that we do have a lot of leeway to imagine things that may not necessarily have happened. So the genre takes liberties. It's part of what makes it a wonderful way to blend fiction with historical research. Now, of course, given my interests, I was especially intrigued to see how Netflix's Bridgerton presents us a racially diverse reimagining of Regency-era Britain. It presents an elite society where racially diverse aristocrats mingle, marry, and rule together, seemingly as equals. What if this glossy fantasy gets some very basic facts about empire wrong? Yes, representation absolutely matters. It's important for racially diverse actors to be able to see themselves in roles like these. But in this video, we're going to explore how Bridgerton's vision of racially diverse Britain actually misses some key truths about how the British Empire came about, how it sustained itself, and what the role of race in it actually was. The central conceit of Bridgerton is that Britain's racial integration has occurred at the top. Queen Charlotte is Black. The aristocracy includes wealthy Black, South Asian, and East Asian dukes and landowners. In the other Netflix series that accompanies the world of Bridgerton, called Queen Charlotte, we get a little bit more of a background into how this came about. The storyline imagines that a great experiment was decided on. That is how the characters refer to it in Queen Charlotte. This great experiment is one that would apparently elevate racially diverse subjects of the British Empire to the landed gentry. It's never quite made explicit why, but we can infer perhaps that this was a plan decided by the British royal family inside the story of the Queen Charlotte TV series, and that they made this decision in a kind of strength in diversity move for the future of the British Empire. But historically, that's not how empire worked at all. The main purpose of the European colonization of the Americas, Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia was to extract wealth. And wealth meant land and the human labor to work it. Now, race and racial hierarchy was a really important ideological aspect of this imperial structure. It helped to keep that wealth accumulation ticking. Racial integration, like the kind we see in the world of Bridgerton, only very rarely occurred. And when it did, it certainly did not in any way mean actually owning land and having a title back in England or Scotland. In Bridgerton, racial diversity is everywhere, but empire is almost invisible. This makes as little sense as talking about fish without ever mentioning the sea. Now, I can hear what you're saying, Sarah. It's a historical romance. Why do they need to talk about these kinds of heavy subjects? And like I said, I love a bit of historical fiction. I'm just trying to make sense of how we actually ended up with these racially diverse characters integrated into the British Empire, when the series actually tells us very little about how empire worked. The opulence we see on screen, the estates, the gardens, the jewels, the inherited titles, was historically sustained through imperial plunder. Whether it was sugar plantations in the Caribbean, textiles from Bengal, or precious minerals from South Africa, wealth flowed to Britain to be able to fund, amongst other things, the lifestyles of the landed gentry who, let's not forget, didn't work for generations and generations. So the aristocracy that we see depicted in Bridgerton actually enriched themselves by taking control of resources. Now, just because this economic incentive was at the basis of empire, of course, doesn't mean that race and racial hierarchies wasn't a useful tool in their toolbox. Wherever it went, the British Empire often created or amplified racial hierarchies by overemphasizing existing differences between colonized subjects. This effectively minimized the risk of an organized anti-colonial movement or rebellion. So you can see how actually diversity in that time and context would have fundamentally weakened the system and impoverished or risked impoverishing those who were benefiting from it at the very top. So is Bridgerton's diversity completely fantasy? Well, not quite. There were some Black and Indian elites in the British Empire, but almost all of them were kept in colonies. But the message to any native that the British Empire chose to elevate was very clear. Succeed on our terms, internalize our values, and then go back to your home colonies and sustain our rule of law. But make no mistake, even that didn't necessarily mean you were on the path to land and wealth in England. Land ownership and aristocratic title were tightly bound to British lineage, as they still are. So the idea that a Black Duke like Simon in Bridgerton might hold vast lands in England during the early 1800s is not just unlikely. It gives us racial diversity while completely avoiding the question of how these individuals would have even been in the British Isles at that time in the first place. The answer, of course, that Bridgerton doesn't mention is the existence of the British Empire, which moved people around colony and metropole just as it moved goods. So let's say we go with the conceit of Bridgerton. We imagine that there are Black and Asian elites who own land and live as aristocratic gentry in England at the time. We've got a troubling contradiction. Either these characters have been gifted what is actually hereditary as part of this great experiment that the British Crown in the story is deciding to do, or they are actually inheriting estates that have indirectly or directly benefited from the pillage and plunder of their own native homelands back in Africa or Asia. This is where Bridgerton's fantasy, which, as I mentioned, is historical fiction, so it's welcome to veer out of fact, it loses coherence. Even fictional narrative needs coherence as it plays out within the world it encapsulates. It wants racial inclusion without acknowledging the economic and political structures that made it possible for England to have a hereditary land-owning gentry. So essentially we have a storyline where we have a British aristocratic elite who enjoy all of the opulence, wealth, and privileges that the British Empire and colonization would have brought them. And yet we have no mention of the sources of their wealth. So am I saying we should not watch Bridgerton or it's no good because of these historical inaccuracies? Of course I'm not. It's so much fun. But what I wanted to say in this video is that even when it comes to historical fiction, we should be asking, what kind of inclusion am I being shown? In Bridgerton, inclusion is imagined as admittance into an elite club, one that inherits wealth without labor, rules by accident of birth and sustains itself through an empire that is kept invisible. While we enjoy the storyline and the romance, it's important to remember that it is not a story of inclusion and justice. It can be best described, I think, as a fictional vision of the past where racial diversity has been absorbed into the project of upholding aristocratic rule. If we're interested in diversity, we must be careful not to mistake representation for real change. Historical fiction is the realm of the imagination. I love it. There is so much we can do with the source material out there to reimagine what the past could have been like. When we think of diversity, justice, and social change, surely we can imagine a fictional world where we go further than merely expanding the ranks of an exclusive club. Thanks so much for watching this episode of The Global Gaze. Tell me what you thought of Bridgerton in the comments below. And don't forget, as always, to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for the channel so you'll see my videos on your feed directly. Until next time, keep your gaze global.